Like a lot of people, when Debbie Hutchins saw her first concerts in the 80s, she loved the live concert experience. But not everyone decides that they want to turn this excitement into a career. A number of years have passed since those first live shows, and since then, Debbie has toured with some of Canada's biggest acts. This is part one of our resource stage conversation with professional live touring technician, Debbie Hutchins. Let's start with, what do you do right now? And then we'll talk about, how did you get into this business?
Well, currently during the pandemic, I'm unemployed,
Right.
like every sound engineer in the world.
Yes.
I'm looking for new job opportunities currently. But pre-pandemic, which was only 10 weeks ago, feels like forever.
Yeah.
I'm a freelance sound engineer, tour manager, and production manager in the live concert field.
Right. Okay. And maybe to give people a bit of an idea, what kind of acts are you working with right now?
So usually it's sort of pop. I've worked anywhere from like folk artists, rock artists that are sort of commercial artists that are, getting some radio play and, touring and have a fairly viable career doing performances. And I would be one of the crew on their gig roster to go out and do performances. So.
Okay. And are you typically working with Canadian artists, or are you doing other projects as well, or how does that work?
It's predominantly Canadian. Like the Canadian music industry is very, very small, so everyone sort of knows each other. So a lot of people know each other or refer each other. All of my work is referral work. Like I don't have a website. I don't even do business cards anymore. So I don't know if anyone does. Maybe no one does business cards anymore, but a lot of it is just word of mouth and referral work. And usually if there's a Canadian artist that's traveling, I'll travel with them. But usually it's predominantly Canadian because it's a word of mouth,
Right. And so if I understand it correctly, in the position that you're in, you could end up being front of house for one tour, and then monitors for another tour, and you might be tour managing or something else for another tour. Does that sound right?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, again, the Canadian music industry is pretty small. A lot of bands are trying to go to their crew and ask them to do more responsibilities. So it's not uncommon to see a front of house / tour manager for an artist, which is really two separate jobs. And that could be a whole different discussion as to, why that isn't such a great thing all the time. And
Right.
So sometimes I've done like monitors or production managing. I'll do front of house and tour managing. So it really just depends on what the client needs, what they have for a budget, and kind of the level of work that's involved. If it's a small enough client, you can sort of get away with doing both. Of course, as the act starts to get a little bit bigger. Sorry, we just got a new kitten, Nipissing, and she is very curious about this. I'm just going to give her a cat cameo here.
Okay, there we go. Yep.
So she's playing with a cable. So it just kind of depends on what's involved. I've always approached it with the whatever it takes philosophy. So I'm happy. Like I've done a tour where I was doing front of house, monitors front of house, tour managing, RF tech, backline tech, and then drove the truck at the end of the day. So it's Canadian technicians.
You didn't play any instruments though.
No. It ended. So, yeah. So.
Okay. So one of the things that we talk about in the resource stage conversations is that there isn't really a typical way to get into this industry, whether it's live touring or whether it's live theater or whatever it is in this industry. Nobody has kind of that set formula that you say, okay, I'm going to do this and then I'm going to do this. And like, you don't go into the guidance counselor at high school and say, hey, I'd really like to do this. And they say, oh, well, this is how you do it, right? So start me off kind of, where did you get this idea and where did that go? How did you get to where you are right now?
Well, that's a really great point, Carl, because
Oh, Deb, I think we lost your mic.
come on, you. Come on.
Okay, so what I was saying is that there is really no standard way to get into this industry. So my question for you is, how did you How did you get into this business, and where did you start?
So that's a great question. And I think we're one of the few industries where you can have somebody who went to like university for music theory for 5 years and then went to a post-secondary school for like an applied theory of music or live sound, standing right next to somebody who was a high school dropout.
Right.
And it really doesn't matter. Unless like for pop music and touring, it's more if you're going to be applying at a professional theater that they would want more like an academic background and degree or a diploma in education. But if you're just going to be a rock and roll roadie, honestly, your level of post-secondary school graduate studies is really not that relevant.
Right.
It's far more the technical skills that you have and how you handle yourself on the road. And your people skills is far more valuable than a diploma. So the amount of times, I mean, I went to Fanshawe College in 1993. I graduated. The number of times I've needed to use that to help me a career, I think would be zero. Like, again, because I just freelanced, you know. Now, having said that, if I were to apply at a theater, for example, like the Grand Theatre in London, something like that, they would probably be looking for some kind of academic diploma. So it's interesting in our career that's even now in 2020 that really your degree of post-secondary is not that relevant to your success, and it's not a marker of your success.
Right.
So for me, I grew up in Brampton, Ontario, a very small town. And I remember going to concerts when I was very young. I went to go and see Duran Duran because I would have been like 17. And Depeche Mode and Corey Hart. Actually, I saw his C&E Grandstand tour.
Wow.
And I was just blown away, like that moment when the lights go down and everybody starts screaming and the band comes out, the bands you've listened to, and you know every note on the record and every word, and waiting for them to come to your small town for months and months was such a huge deal. And that for me was the spark.
Right.
And it was actually through my guidance counselor, had a flyer at our high school for Fanshawe College. And my parents were actually putting a lot of pressure on me to go to university to become whatever parents want their kids to do, become a doctor or a lawyer, normal person. But I was really taken with music, and I didn't really know what to do, how to get into it, how to make that work. And then I applied to Fanshawe College. I actually did not get accepted my first year. I went back to high school, and then I started apprenticing at Phase One Recording Studios as a volunteer. So I would start there, and I was there every weekday, I think, for all of my school year. I took a live sound course through Humber College, and I met an instructor there called Kitty Cross, and she was the first female touring rock and roll chick that I ever met.
Really cool.
And so, yeah. And I just thought, wow, if she can do it, I can do it. So that was kind of the spark. And then I finally got into Fanshawe. And then, I kind of apprenticed and worked in the London area quite in a lot of different areas all through school, and just kept building. Everything's like building blocks and networking in this industry.
So you went to Fanshawe and you went to the music industry arts program. Is that right?
That's right. And I was, at the time, they had a production stream and an engineering stream, and I went into engineering.
Okay, I see. It's interesting that you mentioned that you started off by kind of apprenticing at the studio. So many people in our industry kind of start off in a studio sort of a space. I wonder if part of it, going back to your parents, sometimes it seems like it's maybe a little bit more of a legitimate side of the business because there's a brick and mortar building that you can walk into, that kind of a thing. And it seems like there's something to that, but so many people then end up, if the recording thing doesn't work out, then they end up in live, or they use that as a stream to get into live. I think anyway. It seems to happen regularly.
For sure, yeah.
So you're around the London area, and you were doing some things there, and then kind of how did you start picking up more acts and working on more projects?
Well, while I was at Fanshawe, I got involved with John B. Young. He was a talent buyer at Fanshawe College. So he would book all the bands and entertainment that came through for Frosh Week and Alumni Weekend and all the clubs. They're a little student union facility that would have bands coming through. So I became the VP of entertainment. So I did that for a year and a half, and that was an amazing experience to network with booking bands and meeting the agents and managers and different bands that had come through. And I learned a lot from John B. Young. He was amazing. And at the time, the campuses were very connected with an organization called COCA, which was the Canadian Organization of Campus Activities. And so they had a national conference. So I met a bunch of different people through that. And I used to go over to Western University, which was a larger university in London, and I would work there illegally on their concerts with Pete Stambridge, who was the talent buyer. And of course, they had huge bands playing. They had like Crowded House playing at the time, and every Canadian band went through there. The campuses were a launch pad for a lot of Canadian bands, and this was early 90s. So you're talking about 5440, Tragically Hip were just coming out from Queen's University and had been touring the campus market. The Watchmen came through there. Amanda Marshall came through. Every Canadian band you can pretty much think of, Trooper, April Wine, all those bands came out. A lot of that came out of that market, Spirit of the West.
Right.
So it was a great, really creative time to be involved. And I also worked at Cable 13. I volunteered there as a camera operator and would do audio. I worked for IATSE, doing calls with Terry Barker, believe it or not. Back there, I worked with London Centennial, the Centennial Hall for the Symphony Theatre.
Right.
So had a bunch of different jobs. You just kind of keep hammering at it, you know.
So what you're saying is you sat around and did nothing and hoped that somebody would call you.
So yeah, you just kind of keep finding. And I think at the time I was still finding my footing, like finding the place that, you know, just kind of really worked for me and where it was at. And, you know, so, and then when school finished, I stayed working for a small production company called Paul Sun and Lighting with Paul O'Neill.
I remember Paul O'Neill, absolutely.
Yeah, so amazing person. Learned a lot from him from sound. And
so you know what's interesting about that is the first show that I ever worked on where I did lighting. I set up the lighting and all that kind of stuff. All of the sound equipment came from Paul O'Neill. And I remember, you know, setting up that show and Paul kind of sitting off in the corner. He was fixing some cables or something for us as we kind of were going out doing these shows. And it was a little theater thing. And he had some words of wisdom, we'll call them, as we were going out on this thing. But yes, that was years ago. That was a long time ago.
Yeah, a long time ago. Yeah, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, okay. So then you kind of, you know, you did that around the London area, and then can I assume that you picked up contacts through that and then found other places to work?
Yeah, I actually ended up going to McMaster University as a talent buyer. They had a position opening up there. So I worked there briefly for like 15 months. And that ended. And it was a good job at the time. It was a good paying job. It was a regular job, a real job, still involved in music. So my parents were happy. But I didn't really find I was doing enough of the creative side. Like it was like the talent buyers, you're haggling with money and things like that. So
Right.
I was like, this isn't really what I want to do. I want to try and do this audio thing. And so 6 weeks later, I got a call from a band that I had met at Western, and they were going out on tour and wanted a front of house tour manager. And so I had been doing sound at some smaller theater shows and smaller folk festivals. So I had already had some mixing experience. And then that started 8 years of just a bunch of bands that you've never heard of. Nobody has. In a van, being the only girl for a long time, you know, years after years, just touring, and then finally getting a band that had some songs on the radio. And that was kind of like my first break. And this industry, again, so small that your reputation really gets out quickly. You know, people find out what you're about. So, you know, it just kind of spreads, and every gig and every tour becomes a stepping stone. And then you just keep going, and then you just, you know, your name goes into different circles and different clients and different people. So
yeah, that's cool. Okay, so then that was it. You kind of found your way through working with other bands, that kind of thing.
Yeah, that was man, it's just been 25 years of kind of rinse and repeat, really, you know,
Right.
and just working with new clients. What I find I do my best work, and the one that I enjoy the most, is when I have a small group of people that I work with that I know really, really well, and we
Right.
become like a family. And like I've been doing front of house and tour managing for David Wilcox now for 13 years.
Wow.
So a very long established relationship. We've had hundreds of shows together, amazing concerts, and he's such an amazing musician and performer, and also an outstanding human being, which is right up my alley. You know, some of my prior clients, I toured with Leahy for like 4 years. I toured with Sloan for 5 years. I toured with Jane Arden for 16 years. So I toured with Marion Ord for several years, Chantal Kerbiasic for several years. So usually when I'm into those clients, and then I just kind of want to stay with them and keep working with them. So it's been amazing. And then with the Next Generation Leahy, which is Doug Leahy from Leahy, has started a band with his children. I've actually got to go out and mix him and tour manage him with his kids now, which is like an offshoot of Leahy. So that's been an amazing experience too. And it feels very comfortable because I've spent years on the road with them. So I know, and I watch his kids grow up, and now they're also performers themselves.
Yeah.
So some really great experiences like that really means a lot to me. So
that's neat. Through Resource Stage and through what we do at Horizon, we talk to lots of people who are volunteers and people who are just kind of trying to figure their way out. Sometimes they're just weekend warriors. They don't ever intend to be in this industry full time. In fact, that's a lot of the people we work with. And one of the things we talk about regularly is this idea that, you need to take your position seriously, and you need to be able to respect the person that's on stage, and you need them to respect you. And I think that, what you're talking about is exactly that idea of, it's like you say, a family that you're working with, people that you can trust, they can trust you, that kind of an idea. I don't think that you would get those phone calls if it wasn't for the fact that people can trust you, that they rely on you, and it's not just that your resume is good, but they know that they can trust that what you're going to do is going to be, they're going to get the best thing for their show out of working with you. And it's pretty cool. Building that trust is pretty awesome. And I think, that's the side that's really difficult to go to a Fanshawe college or go to another college or university and them be able to give you that stamp, right? That doesn't come from that. And it's pretty awesome that you've been able to develop that. So before I let you go here, I wanted to ask you about one thing that you touched on earlier on, and that is, well, I guess exactly that, this idea that you're not necessarily going to go to a specific place and get schooling. However, you're dealing with a lot of technology that is not something that you're just going to, just pick it up in a half an hour, right? I know that you are pretty well respected in certain circles with the technology that you use, whether that's wireless technology or mixers, that kind of thing. How have you worked your way through that? How have you tried to keep yourself up to date on that kind of thing?
So that's a really great question, Carl, because I grew up really back in the old days of analog. So
oh, you're so old.
Whoa, so old.
Yeah.
So I actually was one of the last techs that went into digital audio. I had used some of the earlier consoles like the Innovason.
Right.
And really did not have a good experience on them at all.
Well,
and,
the Innovason didn't look like an audio console. It looked like a video game controller that was this big. It was kind of a different animal.
I always tease Adrian Sterling because it's like I never did the whole Yamaha 5D. They became kind of the benchmark of digital consoles, but right. I was still dragging around Heritage 3000 analog consoles, Heritage 250. So I still, to this day, if I'm at a casino gig and they have a 5D, I'm like, I have no idea how to do it. Like, you just put up the faders. I'm just going to mix the show. But it's like patching and snapshots, forget it. Like, just,
Yeah.
So, but the technology, of course, has been changing so much even in the last 5 years, and especially with RF. So basically, you need to learn how to use digital consoles, and you have to be able to use a wide variety of them as a freelance technician. So, yes, I have my personal preferences, but I should be able to be proficient on any of them consoles and get around. Most manufacturers, if not all, have some kind of offline software now that you can download on your computer. So if you don't have access to the console, you can at least see the software. So many companies now have got YouTube and videos and tutorials, and there's been now, especially with the pandemic, everybody's putting out really videos of how to, which has been a great way for companies to kind of, who are on a break, to kind of educate all the techs. It's a great learning opportunity. So for example, for me, I don't have a shop that I can go to. I usually have to call and beg, borrow favors from other production companies like, hey, can I come and, practice mixing on this, or can I load my file at home and bring it in?
Right.
But that is all ongoing all the time. Digital consoles, new software versions, all coming out all the time. RF is huge right now. Like, the bandwidth is shrinking. You have to go into your RF gigs prepared with your homework, knowing how to quickly facilitate to get those frequencies coordinated and be prepared for curveballs. So that's all part of it. But a lot of companies now have different workshops and different programs. You can stay on top of it, for sure. But absolutely, any kind of technology-based program like Live Sound is just changing in leaps and bounds all the time.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. All right, well, thank you very much for joining us, and we're going to have you back for another half of this, and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the shows that you've done and maybe some of that technology and how you've used it.
Sounds great.
Thank you.
Thanks, Carl.
There are lots of people who figure that they want to be part of the big show, but few are willing to put in the work to make it happen. Debbie Hutchins has and still does every day. Debbie is a professional. She's more than just a competent sound person. She's extremely good at what she does. This is part 1 of our conversations with Debbie. In part 2, we'll discuss some of the work she does and the recommendations that she has for those looking to get into this industry. You can find more Resource Stage Conversations at resourcestage.ca. Resource Stage Conversations is a production of Horizon Solutions. Horizon has the privilege to work with professional and amateur theaters and schools across Canada to provide technical solutions for live performance and now more than ever, live streaming. You can find us at horizonsolutions.net. And if you like what we're doing with Resource Stage Conversations, feel free to subscribe so you're one of the first to hear about our next video. I'm Carl Lukings. Thank you for joining us for Resource Stage Conversations.